say. The seas are streaming and reviewing mods and video games. It sets the land in 7 seasons, centuries have passed. Until the day a hero named Mariner famous as. Dark gaming, we love to play video games. We don't keep playing until the early morning. Dark gaming, we explain mods and games. Dark gaming, we sell my games and more. As Mariner set off on his quest to new and get a crew, the navigator joined the ranks and so did Mr. Q. Sailing for adventure, stories and for treasure. We will help you through, so climb aboard and join the crew. Deep dark gaming, we love to play video games. We'll keep playing until the early morning. Deep dark gaming, we explain mods and games. Deep dark gaming, we sell the games and more.
Ahoy divers, and welcome back to Deep Dive Gaming. I am the Mariner, and we are having a conversation about lore in gaming with Hiro. Hey Hiro,
Hey, what's up?
how is everything going for you? Ahoy Mojo, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, been better, been worse. I'm okay.
Meanwhile, I am also driving a train because this seemed like the perfect thing to be doing because it's not highly technical. There's the possibility of allowing me to save when we're done with it, when it's time to, and then resume next week. I don't have to worry about taking out any monsters in the time frame. Ending the stream 5 seconds before I can actually defeat the monster like last week. Yeah, if you watched last week, we ended the stream. And then I went to hunt down the monster, and 5 seconds after I started attacking him, he was ready to be captured, and so that was easy. So, which game do we want to start in on our lore conversation?
Well, I suppose that would depend on what direction you want to go with our conversation. Do you want to explain lore, or do you want to talk about how awesome lore is?
I want to talk about how awesome lore is, and prime examples of said awesome lore.
I mean, where do we... Okay, well, let's see.
We're probably going to actually spread this
go
over a few weeks because we can, and it's such a deep topic. It's perfect for deep dive gaming.
We're gonna have to do that because I'm talking like we could talk about lore as far back as, say, Castlevania,
Yeah,
the
we've
original.
got, what, 50 years of lore we could go back on, go look at. So it's definitely
Not
deep.
quite 50. I would say 40.
Okay.
But yes.
Fair.
But like we could talk, and I'm not gonna do.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to do the 4-hour lore dump that I did on the Metroid series. No.
Is this the one
But we
responsible
could.
for the Attacular?
Yes, it is.
For context,
And
anyone watching,
I know-
there's a thing called an Attacular on YouTube by Lagging Out. That's a cut of all of Hiro's Uz from his 4-hour deep dive into Metroid lore.
Yeah. Yes, and I will never apparently live it down.
Nope, can't get away from it even here. So
Yeah.
I guess
Well,
the
it's-
question is, do we want to go forward in time or backward in time? Do we want to talk about most recent games with good lore or start at the beginning-ish?
I mean, it could go either way, to tell you the truth. I mean, obviously, because we're talking about it, but it's just there's plenty of really good games between recent history and ancient history. Ancient in revelation, or in reference to technology. Good Lord. Having trouble talking today.
So,
But,
We could talk about.
Let's just go ahead. Let's start with what kind of lore really gets you invested, and then let's pick apart aspects of what got you really invested. That would be the surefire signs of good story.
Yes. So Mojo also in the chat, Twitch chat says, "Does anybody know the history behind?" I can't talk either. Apparently, does anybody know the history behind creating lore for games? That would be interesting too.
Oh,
And yeah, that's like
I-
that would be season 2, Mojo. Because
well, if you want to get really into it, I got an easy answer for that, Mariner.
hmm
So, the history behind creating lore. Now, if we're talking in historically for, like, say, video games, well, we'd have to look at storytelling as a medium, which storytelling as a medium goes back to television, movies. Storytelling as a medium for television and movies goes back to the good old book. And if you really want to get down to that history and dive deep into that lore, let's go as far back as quills of ink and papyrus.
Very true. I think Mojo was specifically going for the idea of D&D being one of the first games where lore was important because it had lore. Like the original D&D from back in the 70s.
We did have a really good touch on that topic on Lagging Out last Friday, as Oni so kindly presented and shared her collection of really old D&D modules. Those were like first edition type modules that she was showing off there, and they were a collector's wet dream.
Yes. I'm surprised she didn't.
And I'm
ask
gonna leave it
Soda
at that.
Yeah, I'm surprised she didn't ask Soda to like find out how much they were actually worth. Not that she cared; she wasn't gonna ever sell them, apparently.
I mean, I'd be curious to know the value of them myself, but just for knowledge purposes.
Yeah.
But she got super defensive when Chieftain like mentioned the possibility of eventually selling them. She got super defensive about it.
Yeah.
But enough about that. We're talking about lore specifically, and yes, you know, it came down to conversation about D&D and stuff like that. Good old Gary Gygax, may his soul rest in peace, and may he eventually stop rolling over in his grave.
Yeah.
People can ask the Mariner some other time, some other channel, as to why I make such statements. But we're going as far back as like the 70s for that one, my friends.
I think we should refine our focus a little bit since it's deep dive gaming and we play video games. Let's maybe stick to video games.
Okay.
Now we can loop it back should we choose to because of Baldur's Gate 3, but let's maybe not do that just yet.
Okay. Let's fast forward back to, in truth, it'd still be the era of probably Advanced D&D / Second Edition, even though it wasn't called Second Edition, and shifted over to video games. Let's see, Mario, Super Mario 2 and 3, even though 2 was technically never released. That's a complicated story, but that's for another conversation.
Yeah.
Lore was originally divulged in video games, presented through the video game inserts and instruction pamphlets.
Yeah, I remember one for, was it World of Warcraft 2? Or maybe it was 3. I think that was my first exposure. Was the insert for one of the Warcraft
Ah,
games, not World of Warcraft, but one of the Warcraft games, or maybe it was no, it was Warcraft. They had a
it
nice,
would have been Warcraft.
yeah, one. It was like 2 or 3. I think 2 just had the lore. Like for each level, there was an introductory audio dialogue saying what was going on,
Yep.
and then but in the insert
Hmm.
for, I think it was 2 or 3, I think it was, went into the history of Azeroth and all that, and then
Oh yeah.
to set the scene for the Burning Legion's first assault upon the land.
It was
That was one of the first
not
ones that got me
not the
engaged and
first.
excited.
Not to be contradictory, but it was not the first assault upon the land. That was Warcraft
Well, I
with
was meaning from the
Kel'Thuzad.
Burning. I meant from the Burning Crusade, or
Yeah,
the.
the
No,
Burning
you're
Legion.
right. You're
Yes.
right. You're right. Because in the books, there's a set of books that talked about the one way back, like before
That would have been
Illidan was
Kel'Thuzad.
imprisoned. Yeah, before
Yes.
Illidan was even
Illidan
imprisoned.
didn't. Illidan wasn't imprisoned until Warcraft 3.
Well, he was.
Um,
Well, I thought he was. According to Liam O'Brien's introduction,
Correction.
lines from.
That you actually were correct. Let me revise my statement. Illidan never made an actual appearance in the games until Warcraft 3.
Yeah.
He had been, pardon me, he had been imprisoned,
Imprisoned
but it was
for
not
10,000 years. That is
correct.
One
It
of
was
one of Liam O'Brien's best to this day performances. Just that cinematic trailer.
yes. He had been imprisoned due to a perceived betrayal of the Night Elves. To me, lore in Warcraft, because forgive me, I know you were really invested in the lore behind World of Warcraft. The lore in Warcraft is what really it really held me and had me enthralled, and in truth probably was one of the first. No, probably not one of the first, but I thought it was very well done in how they made you sympathetic to perceived villains. I say perceived because in the story of Warcraft, there's not really good guys and bad guys. Both sides have their own reasons for going to war against each other. Excuse me. They both have their own reasons for going to war against each other. And there's bad actors on both sides. And there's good actors on both sides. And I'm not talking about the acting performances. I'm talking about
The characters and people involved in the inside the story of the game versus those outside getting paid to voice said characters, or vice versa.
Yeah. So, since you brought up a fine example, and I love this example because the story of Warcraft does go back pretty far in time. I was playing Warcraft 2 on a Windows 95 Packard Bell back in the day, as well as, I think, StarCraft once upon a time.
I'm pretty sure
but
I was in the
that's
same
another story.
situation. Yeah, either Windows 95 or 98. I played World of Warcraft 2. I think that was probably my first. Mojo reports the same. So I think we're all
Yep.
on the same boat here.
So I think this is a good story, and we don't have to limit it, in my opinion, to just one game out of that series, because it is a story that spans all 3 games,
Yes.
and even into World of Warcraft, which is still a thing to this day, and to many people's question of why.
Yeah. There's a reason, and
Um,
there's that we can get into if we want to later. But yeah, just the story of
Yeah.
the origin of. Oh, I can't remember any of the names. What was the wizard guy's name?
Kel'Thuzad.
No, ah, Lothar's buddy from.
Oh. Okay, so you have Lothar, you have Arthas is the young prince that turns sour.
Yeah, that
Um,
said it, that.
Jaina Proudmoore. Jaina Proudmoore. Then there was her mentor, which I can't remember his name.
I want to say not Min, but something M.
Oh, Mel something.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Melfius? Was it Melfius?
Hang on, I'm looking. I'm googling Warcraft characters.
Me too.
Medivh.
Ah, Medivh, yes, Medivh. He was a elf, wasn't he?
No, he was a human, but he was the one infested
right.
with the soul of Sargeras, or the spirit of Sargeras, secretly, and the one who originally opened the dark portal to allow the arrival of the orcs.
The Burning Legion, yes. Oh, the orcs, not the Burning Legion.
The orcs was the first attempt the Burning Legion made upon, we'll say it, modern Azeroth, as opposed to ancient Azeroth or modern Azeroth.
Right. Correct. And I apologize. I just drank water wrong, so I'm going to be coughing for a second.
No worries.
Allow me to.
That's where I was really getting into it, because I think it was. Oh man! Once I started playing World of Warcraft and I saw how deep the lore went, I started buying the books, and I went back to the beginning, and I forget what the name of the book, but there was a quote unquote novelization of the first game where you get to see, like, because Khadgar goes and visits the tower that Medivh operated out of, and it kind of goes into the story of Medivh and Lothar and all them during the first game, or the events of the first game, novelized. So not a lot probably tracked from the original, but some things I think did. And then Khadgar, I think his name was Khadgar. Khadgar had his own book. Yeah, it's Khadgar. Khadgar was the apprentice to Medivh, and then Medivh went evil, and Khadgar ended up helping the Alliance defeat the orcs, and then he went.
And I'm trying to remember if Medivh actually had a quote-unquote redemption arc or slash factor.
He did have a redemption arc that was part of World of Warcraft 3. I think the first part, not the expansion.
World of Warcraft?
No, I'm sorry. I keep saying World of Warcraft. I mean Warcraft 3. Because he appears in Warcraft 3.
Yes. Yes, he does. And if I remember correctly, that redemption arc revealed that he wasn't actually responsible for all the stuff with the portals. It was corruption from the soul of Sargeras. Yeah, which the soul of Sargeras was one of the original demons to break through to Azeroth, if I remember correctly.
Sargeras, I think, is the leader of the Burning Legion. He's the bad guy who's like, if you want to go way back, like Silmarillion style, Sargeras would be not Sauron, but the person who Sauron worked for back in the way before times.
Yeah.
I couldn't
remember if it was Sauron's brother or his original mentor. Probably both.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was probably both.
But to break it down, Medivh's mother faced off against Sargeras when Sargeras tried to do an incursion. The soul of Sargeras got embedded into the lady. I forget if it was the reason she was pregnant or if she was pregnant already, didn't know, and so Sargeras possessed the baby. But that baby, i.e. Medivh, grew up, was corrupted by the
And then
soul
later
of Sargeras.
awoken. Yeah, later awoken the soul by mistake.
Yeah.
So, all of these elements, what element would you think made the story, the lore behind Warcraft jump out at you and like seize your interest so well? And that's
It's
kind of like
the
my idea that I'm trying to the idea that I'm trying to go for is key elements that we can point out as specific concepts that grab our attention, that we can kind of draw parallels to other massive lore games that we love. I'm going to branch out from, like, say, story points of, say, the Metroid series.
Ahoy
story
Soda on the
points of
YouTube
Zelda.
side. Be sure
Hey,
to hit the
Soda.
like and
And then
subscribe, Soda. And anyone else on the YouTube watching? Yes, and I think
then
Mojo's...
story points would say Mass Effect.
Yeah, I think Mojo's got it. Depth of characters.
That is
what I was
key
gonna
point that I think is...
What I was just gonna say was the existence of lore was what excited me at the time. The depth of the lore, like how much story there actually was.
Mhm.
But I mean, yes,
Well,
depth of characters is depth of character inside of that bubble of, yes, lore actually existed, and it was the first time that I was exposed to it, and there was so much coolness, like so many good stories in the lore of Warcraft that I was reading about that gave me the thirst to know more, which led me to the books, which cycled back into the games, which led to more books and blah blah blah. But yeah, depth of characters. You can't have good story without depth of character. So it says,
I believe that
I have. He says, sitting in class waiting for students.
So,
Sounds right.
yes, I think depth of character is a very important point. That's a major, basically a major support to the house that is lore, in my opinion. I would point at, and Soda likes to make fun of me for this, the canon, the flow of events, major plot points within the story. If you transition from one game to the next, to the next, to the next, and you're carrying a cohesive story thread, I'm sorry, canon matters.
It does.
The story, that cohesive storyline matters. If you have a major, I don't want to go with franchise, but yes, if you have a major franchise, a major storyline that goes through 3 games, in order for your game to be successful, if it is lore based or story based, you can't have Prince Arthas in game 1 be concerned so deeply about justice and what is right that by game 3 he didn't have a character arc or a storyline that cohesively transitioned him from a paladin to a Death Knight. You can't have him just be a Death Knight in game 3 without a path that brought him to that point.
Yep. Mojo says, overall, a good story is a good base. You can have an amazing story with very little character building. I'm not sure if she's saying that is a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I mean, that is a that is a neutral thing in my opinion.
Yeah.
A good story doesn't always depend on deep characters. A good story, or well, deep characters depend on a good story though,
Yep.
because how do you have a character that has depth and development without a story?
Yep.
It's these are all major and important points, I think. Like
Mojo said
so,
she meant it as a good thing. So yeah, we're good.
yeah.
So yeah, of
Another point that I would like to point out, in my opinion, aside from just canon matters, so
yeah.
does over there rolling his eyes. But aside from that, um, a setting, world development,
Yeah, world
like
building. There's a book series I'm reading right now. I think it's my third or fourth time through the book series, and every single time I read it, I long for more story set in that world because the author built the world so completely and so with so much detail that I'm like, I want there to be more to this, and there isn't, and that annoys me.
yeah, I mean, we can branch off so much from just talking about lore in video games, and we can branch off to so many book series, so many movies, so many TV shows. So here's a concept that boggles a lot of people's minds. I'm just kind of all over the place, I know, but we're talking about lore. So we're
It's
not talking
stream
about
of
specific lore.
show is called Stream of Consciousness, where the stream of consciousness takes us. That's where we go
Yep.
for this conversation.
So I'm going to branch off into something else. Games, game franchises that started without an interwoven storyline, but later became an interwoven storyline. Example, or to clarify that deeper, the game devs created a bunch of different games, but they didn't have any plans to connect any of them. But then later decided there was a connection after the fact.
Yeah.
Prime examples: the Final Fantasy series, the Legend of Zelda series. Some people would argue the Kingdom Hearts series, but be careful who you say that to because they will fight you over it.
Yeah. Did Tekken have or Mortal Kombat have lore before? So I feel like those
Mortal
kind
Kombat.
of, from what you've talked about Mortal
Excuse me.
Kombat in the past, it sounded like they had lore from the beginning, but it wasn't like lore that you could see in the game. It was lore in like other things. Like did they
It
have
was
comic books or
really
something along those lines? Or
no,
what was-
no. The lore, from what I understand, behind games like Mortal Kombat, Mortal Kombat and Tekken and Street Fighter, fighting games early on always had some sort of cohesive story, but in a fighting game back in the day, it could not be. It couldn't be included in the format that the game was played. So remember when I said the instruction pamphlets held all the lore? Those were some of the games that held all the lore in the instruction pamphlets. And then later on, or maybe even before the game came out, they had like a story trailer or something that was released, things like that, or in the character profiles the story was told, things like that. You didn't really start getting those games really didn't start revealing their actual stories in the gameplay until probably closer to the PlayStation era. or N64 era, depending on which side you're on of the console wars.
Way uphill now. Oh, no.
um, but yeah, I was getting at games like, well, games where their overarching story ended up connecting after the developers had already released several games that had no cohesive story. And my thought process is, what do you think of situations like this?
Where they're they're inserting lore to connect games that were previously not intended to be connected.
Yes.
Okay. So that can only be judged based on the success or the what am I thinking? Like not the like the success or the completeness of the story, whether or not they could weave a good story that included all of the elements without breaking canon. Mojo in the Twitch side says, I think Double Dragon started as a loose story but about two brothers and something about the Yakuza. I just remember it being super basic story and then it grew. So
that is very true. Very true.
So something like that where, I mean, if there's a basic story behind the scenes that maybe we're not privy to that they then explore and then expand upon, that's one way to do it. But if we're talking there was absolutely nothing before they had the thought about adding lore, then you can only judge it by its success. If it was well written and accepted by a good portion of the audience, and then they embraced it and continued to buy products as that lore grew because the lore started to expand the story or whatever, then I would say I got no problem with that. If they tried it and it backfired on them and affected their sales and or their audience didn't like it and or other things, then I would say they probably shouldn't have bothered, or they need to scrap it and try again. If there are games that are if the games, like, as part of the game itself, like, here's the thing, movies that have sequels that don't need to have sequels but have sequels anyways that do well or better than their first game or first movie, then they've deserved their place. If a movie was made that needed to have a sequel, then either the first movie was done poorly, or the first movie was actually only part one of a bigger story. Same with games. If there was a part one and then a part two that expanded on part one, built off of it, that's also acceptable. But if you're outside of that, if it wasn't intended, and then they tried to force something, but it wasn't well received, then you can't say it was like you can't pick a game. Like, let's do an example. I'm playing Train Sim World 4 right now. There's a Train Sim World 3 that's pretty much just the same engine, just lower graphic detail. Train Sim World 2, Train Sim World 1. If they tried to make any sort of story to connect the four games, it would utterly fail, because the point of these games is nothing more than to simulate driving trains across the country. There's no place for lore here, because you can play all the trains you could play with in the first three games, you can play with in the fourth game. You can import the DLCs from the previous games into this game.
So it's great. I think I built a little bit of a base there to kind of build this little conversation a little bit. Trying to be conscious of time.
Yeah, we got about 25 minutes. But we're going to continue the conversation next time. So find a good spot to
That's fair.
Put a pin when we're ready to put a pin, and see if we can pick it up again next week. But anyways, go ahead.
Okay. Make a footnote. I'm going to talk about games that don't have a story, but the don't have a real actual story behind the gameplay, but have a story behind the concept. Put a footnote in that. I'm going to reference Sins of a Solar Empire, and
Game. Say it one
in
more time.
comparison,
Say it one more time. I'm actually ready to type now. Games that.
games that have a story behind the concept, but the gameplay doesn't create a story.
But the game doesn't create a story. Okay.
And the example for that would be Sins of the Solar Empire. Very similar gameplay to, if you need a reference for what I'm talking about, it's similar to Homeworld in gameplay.
Oh, okay.
But now I'm going to rewind because I want that note for a possibility for next week's conversation, because I don't know how long this is going to take.
Okay.
Back to the developers creating a story post-release behind a franchise. My reference is The Legends of Zelda.
Yeah, you and I think have been talking about that privately.
Yeah, I love that franchise. Before there was a cohesive story behind the franchise, I was one of the guys that was actually sitting down and creating theories about how they interconnected. Like, come on, puppies, let's go outside. Come on. I know you were laying down and comfortable and I disturbed you. Go outside. But I really was creating theories behind what the story behind each version of Link actually was. I was connecting the different games in my mind, and there was a handful of them that I never played, so I had no idea where they would fit in a timeline. And then here we are in it was the release of Skyward Sword. When Skyward Sword released, the special edition released with a manga and a soundtrack CD. Still have the original of this. It released on the Wii. A lot of people didn't like it because it had motion controls, and people absolutely despise motion controls.
Mojo, just quickly, Mojo says, as a Wii gamer, I honestly was making them fit together in my head. Didn't actually realize they didn't actually connect until much later. Haha.
That's funny.
Keep going.
But when they released that game, and I read that manga, it was literally a comic at the end of the instruction book that I later found out was like a special edition release. You don't get that really anywhere aside from the special edition. And it was written just like a manga. It was inverted. You read from right to left, and you read from back cover to front cover, just like a legitimate manga. And it literally told the origin story of the legendary hero and the Princess of Legend and how they came to be. And it was supposed to be a prequel story to the events that happened in Skyward Sword, which, by the way, would imply that Skyward Sword is a prequel to the entire series. Now, when I found that out, I started looking into things, and I discovered that they also released, probably 6 months later, a book from Nintendo called the Hyrule Historia that linked all of the games in a cohesive timeline and their stories together. Now, Nintendo for years have denied, up until that point, they had denied that there was ever a connection between any of the Legend of Zelda games. And then it came down to Hiro was right. In fact, a lot of how I placed the timeline was correct. And I was correct in that there was 3 timelines. Like the timeline actually splits into 3 different storylines with the Nintendo 64 game, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time actually has a timeline where the ending actually gives you 3 different timelines, but it's not actually spelled out in that game. In one timeline, the ending is the hero goes to the future, defeats Ganondorf, and then the princess sends him back to his own time so that he could live out his child years, because she felt bad that she basically took away his childhood. So she sent him back in time to his own timeline, or well, to his younger years, because he gets sealed for 7 years, and the act of drawing out the sword and placing the sword causes him to travel forward and backward through time. Well, she sent him back in time to where he's a kid so that he could live out his child years. Well, the timeline from him going to the future 7 years after the defeat of Ganondorf continues forward, and you have several games that fall in line and take place after that event. The hero actually isn't the hero isn't present in that timeline in that era. And then you have the child timeline where Link goes to the princess and tells her the events of what happened after he drew the sword from the stone, and tells her about how Ganondorf took over the world and everything and just basically destroyed the kingdom. And the two of them go together to her father, who is the king, to warn him that Ganondorf is a traitor, and he gets thrown in prison and then later executed. Well, the timeline continues, and there's several games that fall in that timeline in those events where Link goes and tells the princess what happened. And then there's a third timeline that nobody knows about, and that's where they say, quote unquote, the hero never appears to save Hyrule, which is basically the events in that game that would have happened if Link had been defeated. So now you have several games that follow that timeline where Link had been defeated. Mm-hmm. Now, now it is a byproduct of Nintendo going back and deciding on a whim to link all the games together. Since that book was published, I do have that book, by the way. Since that book was published, a couple of the games have changed places in the timeline. The lore doesn't mesh perfectly, but because of the way the games are done, they don't have to, because there's always a story about a legendary hero clad in green, a hero of legend, a hero that was blessed with courage, things like that. They all start with some sort of legend being referenced, and then it jumps into the storyline. You can easily look at all of these games and go, oh, okay, it's a legend, so the story doesn't exactly translate perfectly from one game to the next, because events don't happen exactly as told in legend. because as we all know, word of mouth, it's like a game of telephone. So you can suspend your disbelief for some of these factors. I think it works very well with The Legend of Zelda. Not so much with games like, say, Mass Effect.
Yeah.
You could it, you
Mojo
couldn't
says it's like all the
just
different legends of King Arthur. Like
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. You can actually look at that, and in fact, the cool thing is with the latest releases of Zelda, with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you can look at those games, and there's actually in-game lore where you hear different stories and different legends, and you discover an item or discover a piece of equipment that's a legendary piece of gear that not exactly what you were expecting, you know. And, or there's some lore there's some quest beats where it's like, this is the legend, and then the legend plays out slightly different in a way that you didn't expect, you know. Again, like a game of telephone.
Yep. So in the last 10 or so minutes of the game of this stream, I'm going to take what you did, talk about your favorite topic, and talk about. We talked about World of Warcraft, that's an early one, but my most recent game based lore has got to be, because it's the elephant in the room, Mojo mentioned it at the beginning of the stream, Fallout. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds of like the controversial the controversial, like who won, lived and who died at the end of Fallout 1 or Fallout 2, but just but those games giving us a basis for the lore that we got then in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, the lore that we're gonna get with Fallout London. Hopefully they give us a true feeling that something that England survived the end of the world. But the fact that they took something from the beginning, like Fallout being such. Wastelander was the beginning of the Fallout lore for me. I agreed, Mojo. I've read about that one. I've never played it. But the idea behind it is definitely one to stand the test of time as far as like well thought out, well accomplished. They probably like this is the alternative to Hero, where he's saying the ones that didn't have lore and then lore was given to them. Fallout always had lore from the very beginning. I only discovered the Fallout lore through Fallout 4 and then looking at other people's content on YouTube, digging into the history of like New Vegas, the Fallout 4 Commonwealth, Fallout 3 with the DC. It was all well told, well accomplished, very interesting. There was depth of character, there was all sorts of things, but the part that I'm always fascinated in is the level of technology that they had before the war that they have yet to get back to 200 years later. Like like you had television broadcasts, but I mean it's the disconnect. It's the 50s style retro idea of what the future would look like, that the future became until the bombs fell, and then the remnants of that after that you see through playing in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 that you got originally in Fallouts 1 and 2. Just like you've got two different worlds interposed one on top of the other. You've got the pre-war lore of the United States It's war with North Korea, the resource war. You got DLC in Fallout 3 that puts you in that, but overlaid on top of that is the world post-war, like with everything falling apart, with everything in pieces, with civilization pretty much bombed back to the Stone Age. Mojo says, like, what's keeping them from being able to get there again 200 years after the nukes fell? Oh, it was China, not North Korea? Okay. Yeah. I think you're right.
It was a communist country.
It was a communist country in battle for the last remaining oil resources of Alaska. And it was... But it's just the one world overlaid on top of the other that fascinates me, because I want to see... I want there to be a game that takes place before the bombs fell, or at least maybe some levels. Like maybe it would have to probably be mods, but it would like something that allowed us to explore what the Commonwealth looked like or DC looked like before the bombs fell. Have a story that takes place before the bombs fell. Along the same vein, like Fallout 4 was very dedicated to having corrupt corporations competing in various criminalistic ways, and I would like to kind of explore that. And you get, but this is back to what I was talking about with World of Warcraft. It's just there's depth to the story. There's more to build upon. There's the existence of that deeper lore that you don't necessarily get unless you've seen or like played all the games or seen people talking about the lore to realize how much there actually is. Ahoy, Gazoo!
Oh, what's up, Gazoo? I want to interject a little bit because I don't want you to think that I don't like Fallout. I absolutely adore Fallout. My first exposure to Fallout was Fallout 3, and I enjoy. My wife just shouted out, "Nerd!"
Yeah, we heard.
It was Fallout 3 was amazing to me. It was my step back into computer gaming after, having not played really any computer games for a very long time. It was that and Dragon Age and then Mass Effect. Those were the computer games that got me back into computer gaming after having not touched many computer games since World of Warcraft had dropped. Mind you, remember, I was in the beta test of the foundation of World of Warcraft.
Oof. So one second, Mojo, on my topic of a cool game to be pre-war, Mojo says that would be a very cool game to explore, but part of the Fallout charm is the ability to change the outcome, the world-changing decisions that you make, and that would be taken away with a pre-war game. True, Mojo, very true. I'd still like to explore that.
Possibly.
I would still want to explore
because
that.
I would enjoy that as well, because you got the entire concept behind Fallout and the way the technology is in the post-war era. You have to keep in mind, you're looking at stuff that has that 50s, 60s aesthetic. And you're like, wait a minute, we didn't have this kind of technology in the 50s or 60s. But at the same time, our computers were so much more advanced than this.
Yeah. It's just the path that
you're looking at it. You got
it's the developmental path that they took post World War II with the atomic age. Like there was no nuclear age for them. It was all atomic age. To
a degree, yes.
Yeah,
it was, and it made sense. Like, to me, what I understand is, and this, I got this from actually a lore dump from probably the same guy on YouTube that you got all of your information from. But my understanding is that the technology path that they took stayed along the atomic like pre-nuclear pre-nuclear path, and instead of advancing in um, microchip technologies, they instead advanced in atomic energy. And that's why you have all these cars out there that if you like shoot them too much, they explode in a nuclear
Yeah.
reaction. And it's like, why was there a mushroom cloud? Why am I dead?
That's interesting. Mojo says, according to the lore, the scientist that invented the microchip had died, so the microchip was never patented and invented, hence why the technology never advanced.
Huh.
So there's something I don't think either one of us knew.
Yeah, I just it makes sense actually in it makes sense in context of what I figured out, which was, well, we didn't have microchip advancement, but instead we had nuclear or atomic advancement, and why every car seems to create a mushroom cloud if you shoot it too many
Yeah.
times.
Just one well-placed bullet won't do the trick. But one otherwise well-placed bullet plus time equals boom.
Yeah. Oh, so many times where that was the make or break of my fights when I was getting swarmed unintentionally. It was like, yes, it killed all the bad guys. I'm free to go. Let me go. Oh, crap. I just died from an explosion.
Yeah. That's where Mojo says the timeline diverged from real world to Fallout world. So, and that totally makes sense.
It does.
So we need to find
totally agree.
find a pin because we're about at the end of the end of our time for tonight.
Yes. I think we kind of both made our points. I think actually this is a good spot to pin it because it would be a good jump off point to go to video games that don't actually have lore behind their gameplay.
Cool. All right. So tune in tomorrow night on Deep Dive Gaming for Starfield for Science. Yes, I'm still playing that game. Hiro will be next. Hiro will be back next week for more of this awesome conversation. Thursday night, Soda Pop and I will be playing Baldur's Gate 3 on the Lag and Ouch channel, and then be sure to tune in Friday to see Hiro, Soda, Chieftain, and Black Light for Lagging Out Live. Am I forgetting anything? I don't think I am. So, until then, enjoy gaming, fair winds, and fun. Well, you get it. And
fair winds and safe voyages.
Yes. Well, my usual thing is fair winds and fun gaming, but I covered that already. So I guess until tomorrow night, or I guess I'll thank you for hanging out with me in the chat, by the way, Mojo and Soda. See y'all tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Have a good one, guys.